The twins hadn't eaten in days, their tiny faces pale, their eyes guarded. Every nanny had failed, until she walked in with a strange, playful plan. But what Damian Hale, their powerful millionaire father, saw next would shatter his rules, stir old wounds, and change their lives forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The grandfather clock in the corner of the Hale Mansion's dining room ticked with an authority that mocked Damian's morning. It was already 8:15, and the long, polished oak table looked like it had hosted a banquet for ghosts. Plates untouched, silverware unused, the smell of fresh waffles cooling in the air. Damian stood at the head of the table, phone pressed between his ear and shoulder, trying to finish a call with a board member while also addressing the two stubborn figures across from him. Max sat slouched in his chair, a 4-year-old fortress of defiance with his arms folded tight across his chest. Beside him, Mia mirrored his posture, her little chin tipped up in that way that reminded Damian far too much of her mother when she was determined to win an argument. Two identical pairs of hazel eyes, his late wife's eyes, glared back at him with unblinking resolve. "Ax, Mia, you haven't touched a thing," Damian said, lowering his phone for a moment. His tone was even, but the strain was evident. "You liked waffles yesterday." The only reply was the scrape of Mia's fork being pushed farther away, as if the very presence of syrup offended her. Max didn't even look at the plate. His gaze had shifted to the window, where the late winter light filtered through the frosted glass. On the other end of the phone, his CFO was still talking. Damian forced himself to respond with a clipped, "I'll review the numbers after the meeting," before ending the call. The mansion was quiet, except for the hum of the heating system and the faint tap of rain against the windows. It had been like this for months, ever since Claire, their mother, had passed unexpectedly. At first, he had excused their refusal to eat as part of the grief, but as the weeks turned into months, the act hardened into a ritual. Breakfast became a standoff, lunch a battlefield, dinner a silent war. And no matter what chef prepared, no matter what games or incentives were tried, the plates went cold and just a bite, he tried again, kneeling beside Mia's chair. His voice softened, but his hand hovered awkwardly, unsure whether to touch her or let her have her space. "You're going to be hungry later." Mia's lips pressed tighter, her eyes flicking to Max as if taking her cue from him. Max shook his head once, slow and deliberate, as if that was the final word. Damian stood, exhaling through his nose. He had built an empire out of decisive actions and iron discipline, but none of that meant anything here. At the office, problems bent to his will. At home, two 4-year-olds had him cornered and losing ground. A crash from the kitchen broke the standoff. One of the staff had dropped a tray. Damian's jaw tightened, not in anger but in exhaustion. He'd gone through 4 nannies in the last month alone. Each one had arrived full of bright strategies and gentle voices, only to leave within days, defeated by the twins' unyielding silence and sharp little tempers. The last one had quit mid-shift, muttering something about walls you can't climb. His assistant Mark appeared in the doorway like he'd been listening for the right moment. "Morning chaos?" he asked, carefully, his eyes flicking to the children before settling on Damian. "Same as yesterday, and the day before that," Damian said. David smiled. Damian's answer? Mark hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've found someone I think you should meet. She's not the usual." Damian gave him a look. "Not the usual? We've tried career nannies, child psychologists, teachers. What's left?" "Different," Mark replied. "Her resume won't impress you, but her references, they all mention one thing. She has a way with children who've stopped trusting." Damian folded his arms. "Stopped trusting?" Mark glanced at the twins, whose stares hadn't wavered. She worked with a boy who hadn't spoken in months after losing his parents, another girl who refused to leave her room. She doesn't just manage children, she reaches them. Damian wanted to dismiss the idea outright. He had no patience for miracle claims, yet something in Mark's tone, that quiet certainty, kept him from shutting it down. "Her name? Evelyn Ross. She can come this afternoon for an interview. Damian rubbed the back of his neck. You're telling me her resume won't impress me? That's not a great start. Mark's mouth lifted slightly. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm trying to help them. Damian's eyes drifted back to the twins. Max was tracing a finger along the edge of his plate, avoiding eye contact, while Mia stared at a spot on the wall as if she could will herself elsewhere. They looked so small in the high-backed chairs, swallowed by the grandeur of the dining room, their stubbornness the only shield they had left. Fine, Damian said at last. One meeting. Mark nodded once, already pulling out his phone to make the call. The rest of the morning passed in a strained rhythm. Damian tried to coax them with stories about his day, about the construction site for the new Hale Foundation building, but they offered no response beyond the occasional blink. Business calls came and went. The mansion staff moved quietly around them, and the plates of waffles eventually cooled into uneaten relics of yet another failed meal. By noon, Damian was in his study, reviewing documents, when Mark knocked on the doorframe. She's here. And Damian stood, straightening his jacket. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe someone overly cheerful, brimming with unearned confidence, ready to try the same tired tricks. But when he stepped into the grand foyer, he found Evelyn Ross standing just inside the threshold. She wasn't smiling in that forced way so many nannies did. Her gaze was steady, her posture relaxed but attentive. She wore a simple navy coat, a worn leather satchel over one shoulder. There was nothing about her that screamed miracle worker. And yet, there was something, a calm, unflinching presence, as if she had already measured the chaos she was about to walk into and wasn't intimidated. Max appeared at the top of the staircase first, small fingers gripping the banister. His narrowed eyes locked on her immediately, suspicion radiating from every inch of him. A beat later, Mia stepped beside him, her little arms crossed in perfect mirror to her brother's defiance. Damian saw Evelyn take in the sight of them, not just looking, but truly seeing. And in that brief moment, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, Mark had been right. Evelyn stood for a moment on the marble step, taking in the towering double doors before her. The brass knocker gleamed in the morning light, its polished surface reflecting her own nervous expression. She smoothed her coat, adjusted the strap of her bag, and tried to steady the rhythm of her breathing. Somewhere beyond these walls were two children who hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks, and a man who, according to every whispered she'd heard, was as untouchable as the wealth he commanded. The door swung open before she could knock. A tall man in a charcoal suit filled the frame, his posture immaculate, his dark eyes fixed on her with the measured politeness of someone used to controlling every interaction. Miss Ross? His voice carried the clipped precision of someone juggling 100 priorities. Yes, she said, summoning a smile. Evelyn Ross, I believe you're expecting me. Before he could respond, a sharp patter of footsteps echoed from the polished marble foyer. Two small figures emerged, Max with his brow furrowed like a little mirror of his father's, and Mia with her arms crossed so tightly across her chest it was a wonder she could breathe. Damian Hale glanced down at them, then back at her, as if silently issuing a challenge. Here they are, let's see what you can do. Evelyn bent slightly, meeting the children's wary eyes without forcing a smile. Hi Max. Hi Mia. I've heard a lot about you. Neither moved. Max's gaze narrowed further, his jaw set in the stubborn line of someone far older than 4. Mia shifted her weight, still silent, her little chin lifted in defiance. From somewhere deeper in the house, a faint chime sounded. Damian's phone. He muttered something under his breath, stepped back to take the call, and left her at the threshold with the twins. Evelyn didn't fill the silence with chatter. She let the quiet stretch, reading the shape of it, the distrust, the loss, the challenge. She had been the wary child once, standing in doorways, measuring strangers. Finally, Max spoke, his voice low and flat. We don't like nannies. That's okay, Evelyn replied softly. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to make sure you're okay. Mia's eyes flickered, a crack in her guarded expression, but she didn't speak. When Damian returned, the call ended. He caught the brief exchange. Something in his gaze shifted, though his voice stayed formal. Come in, Miss Ross. We'll see how this goes. She stepped inside. the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers filling her senses, and the heavy door closed behind her with a sound that felt almost like the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The playroom was a world of bright colors and scattered chaos. Plush animals leaning against the wall like silent witnesses, a miniature kitchen set with plastic pots abandoned mid-grieve, and a tower of blocks standing precariously near the center rug. The sunlight filtering through the tall bay windows made the dust motes swirl lazily in the air, as if they had all the time in the world. Evelyn paused at the doorway, not stepping in immediately. She wanted to see the room as the children saw it, a space that was theirs, even if they didn't seem to take joy in it anymore. Max was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a toy fire truck in his lap, though he wasn't pushing it around, just turning the wheels slowly with his fingers. Mia sat at the low table with a coloring book open, her crayon poised over the page, but from behind her, she felt the weight of Damian Hale's gaze. He didn't say anything, just stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. It was clear he was waiting for her to make the first move, and maybe waiting for her to fail like all the others had. Evelyn stepped into the room quietly, her shoes making almost no sound on the soft rug. "This is a nice room," she said, not expecting an answer. She let her eyes wander, noticing a half-finished puzzle on the corner shelf, a picture of a lighthouse on a rocky shore. It had been left untouched for so long that a thin layer of dust clung to the top of the box. Instead of asking them questions they might ignore, she walked over to the puzzle box and slid it onto the rug. She didn't announce her intentions. She simply sat cross-legged on the floor and began turning the pieces right side up. The silence stretched, but it was different now. Curiosity had a way of shifting the air. She could feel their glances without looking up. Mia had tilted her head ever so slightly, the crayon still hovering above the paper. Max's fingers had stilled on the fire truck wheel. "Do you like puzzles?" she asked casually, picking up a corner piece and fitting it to another. Neither replied. She didn't push, she just kept working, letting the soft click of cardboard against cardboard fill the space. Damian shifted behind her, the faint rustle of his suit audible in the stillness. She wondered if he expected her to pepper the children with questions or try to coax them into interaction. Instead, she kept her pace unhurried, letting them decide if they wanted to join. After a few minutes, she placed two connecting edge pieces together and smiled faintly. "Looks like the sea," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "I like the way the water looks when it's all different shades." That caught Mia's attention, just barely. Her eyes darted to the puzzle for a fraction of a second before returning to her coloring book. Max leaned slightly to get a better view. "You know," Evelyn continued, "when I was little, I used to think the ocean could change colors depending on its mood. Sometimes it was calm and blue, sometimes it was dark and stormy. It made me wonder if maybe the sea had feelings too." Mia's crayon touched the page for the first time, tracing a small curve. Max let the fire truck slide from his lap and land softly on the rug. Evelyn didn't comment on their movements. She knew the quickest way to lose their interest was to make a big deal about it. Instead, she kept fitting pieces together, every so often tilting her head in thought or scanning the pile for the one she needed. "What's your favorite color?" she asked after a while, still not looking directly at them. Mia pressed her lips together and kept coloring. Max's eyes narrowed, his small hand reaching toward the puzzle box as if deciding whether to touch it. "Mine used to be green," Evelyn went on, "because it reminded me of the grass in the park near my grandma's house. But now I think I like yellow better. It feels like sunlight you can hold." There was a flicker of something, recognition, maybe, on Mia's face, but still no words. Damian, stamped behind her, remained rigid, though she sensed he was paying closer attention than he wanted to admit. He had probably seen enough trial runs with other nannies to know the usual patterns: overager friendliness, forced questions, and eventual defeat. Evelyn wasn't following the script. She picked up a piece with a bit of sky on it and set it in place. "This part looks tricky," she said lightly. "The clouds are all the same color." Max leaned forward. His small hand hesitated, then reached for a piece near her knee. Without a word, he placed it next to the one she had been working on. It didn't fit, but she didn't correct him. Maybe it goes somewhere else, she said, sliding it aside gently. Or maybe it's part of a different cloud. Max looked at her, his expression unreadable, then glanced at the puzzle again. Evelyn let the moment pass without praise or correction. She simply went back to sorting, humming a faint tune under her breath. "What song is that?" Mia asked suddenly, her voice so soft it might have been mistaken for the windows of the windows. Evelyn glanced at her briefly, surprise. "Oh, just something my mom used to hum when she was cooking. I don't even know if it's a real song." "What's it called?" "I'm not sure it has a name," Evelyn said. "It was just warm, like being wrapped in a blanket." Mia's eyes dropped back to her coloring, but the line she drew was smoother now, less tense. Evelyn let another few minutes pass before speaking again. "Do you have a favorite stuffed animal?" No answer this time, but she noticed Mia's gaze flick toward a small, worn bunny on the couch cushion across the room. When she reached for another puzzle piece, Max spoke, not to his sister, not to his father, but to her. "Blue," he muttered, so quietly she almost missed it. Evelyn's hand stilled on the puzzle piece. She didn't look at him right away, just let the words hang there. "Blue," she repeated softly. "That's a good color." Damian's breath shifted behind her, an almost imperceptible sound, but enough to tell her he had caught the significance. She didn't turn to see his reaction. The moment wasn't about him. It was about the boy who hadn't voluntarily spoken to a nanny in weeks, finally offering her a piece of himself. Max's voice had been so small, so careful, that Evelyn almost felt like speaking too quickly might scare it back into silence. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, her fingers brushing over a puzzle piece with a patch of sky. "Blue is calm," she said, keeping her tone steady, "like the ocean on a quiet day, or the blanket I use to wrap around my shoulders when I read books by the window." Max's eyes darted to her, then to the puzzle again. There was no smile, but the tension in his shoulders eased just a little. Damian shifted his weight in the doorway. His eyes were fixed on his son, but there was something else there now, an alertness, a question. Evelyn noticed it without turning fully toward him. She didn't want to break the rhythm she'd found. She placed another piece in the puzzle, this one forming the start of the lighthouse's white walls. "When I was your age," she continued, still speaking as if she were simply filling the air, "I thought blue was a magic color. If I wore it on days I felt sad, it made me feel safer." For a moment, the only sound was the faint tick of the playroom's clock. Then Mia's crayon stilled, her fingers tapping the table. "Mine's purple," she said softly, almost as if correcting her brother. Evelyn glanced over at her, her lips curving slightly. "Purple is brave," she said. "It's the color you see when the sun sets and the sky can't decide if it wants to be night or day." Mia's mouth twitched, a flicker of interest passing over her face. She picked up a second crayon, purple, and began shading the dress of the figure in her coloring book. Damian exhaled quietly, though Evelyn doubted he realized he had been holding his breath. "Do you think colors can be friends?" Evelyn asked after a pause, sliding another piece into place. "Like blue and purple, maybe they sit together in the sky when the clouds are gone." Neither child answered, but Max's hand reached toward the pile of puzzle pieces again. This time, he chose one carefully, studying the shapes before placing it in the correct spot. He didn't look at her when he did it, but his small action spoke volume. Evelyn didn't praise him. She didn't clap or gush. She simply said, "That fits perfectly," and moved on. It was strange, Damian thought, watching from the doorway. In the past, every nanny had tried too hard, the size of exaggerated encouragement, constant chatter. The children always withdrew, retreating behind the same wall of silence. But Evelyn was different. She seemed content to let the silence exist, to make space for it instead of trying to fill it. He found himself wondering if it was patience or strategy. Either way, it was working. After nearly 20 minutes, the lighthouse puzzle had begun to take shape. Max sat beside Evelyn now, his knees drawn up, occasionally selecting a piece. Mia remained at her table, but her eyes strayed to the puzzle every few minutes, as though she were considering moving closer. "You know," Evelyn said lightly, Puzzles are funny thing. Sometimes the piece you're looking for is right in front of you, but you can't see it until you've stopped searching so hard. Max tilted his head, his small brow furrowed in thought. He didn't respond, but she could tell the words had landed somewhere in his mind. "Almost done," she murmured, as the final row of pieces came together. "It's a nice lighthouse, strong, steady, even when the waves crash." She didn't add the rest of the thought, but she felt it anyway. Everyone needs something that stays, even when everything else changes. The last piece was in Max's hand. Evelyn waited, saying nothing. Slowly, he pressed it into place, completing the picture. Mia stood up from the table, walking over to see the finished puzzle. She looked at it for a long moment, then touched the edge of the cardboard. "It's okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's more than okay," Evelyn said, her tone still gentle. "It's something we made together." Damian's throat tightened unexpectedly. Something about the way she said "we" carried more weight than it should have. Mia crouched beside her brother, her small fingers brushing against his arm. "We could do another," she murmured. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe after lunch?" The mention of lunch made both children stiffen, their eyes flicking toward the door as though escape routes were already being considered. Damian straightened, expecting the same shutdown he'd seen with every other nanny: refusal, avoidance, another battle he'd have to fight. But Evelyn didn't press. "We'll see how we feel later," she said simply, and began stacking the puzzle pieces back in the box. Max watched her do it, his lips moving soundlessly, as though testing a word he wasn't ready to say out loud. Damian realized something then. She wasn't trying to win them over with force. She wasn't negotiating or bribing. She was simply present, and that somehow was drawing them out. "Do you like stories?" Evelyn asked suddenly, glancing between them. Mia's eyes flicked to her brother, then back. "Sometimes." "What kind of stories?" Mia shrugged. "Ones with animals." "Do they have to be happy stories?" Evelyn asked. Another shrug. "They can be, as long as the animals don't get lost." Evelyn nodded, as if this were an entirely reasonable requirement. "I think I might know a story like that. Maybe I can tell it later, if you want." There was no promise, no pressure, just an open door they could choose to walk through. Damian glanced at the clock. He had a meeting in less than 15 minutes, but for some reason, he found himself lingering. It had been so long since he'd seen the twins show even a spark of interest in someone new. When Evelyn stood, she didn't reach for their hands or tell them what to do next. She simply said, "I'm going to put this puzzle away. If you need me, I'll be in the kitchen." She walked past Damian without looking at him, though she felt the weight of his gaze follow her out. He stayed in the doorway a moment longer, watching Max and Mia as they looked at each other. Neither spoke, but something had shifted. As he finally turned to leave, he found her in the hall, sliding the puzzle box back onto a shelf. "You didn't push them," he said, his voice low. Even replied, "They've had enough pushing." For a beat, they simply looked at each other. Then Damian nodded once. "We'll see how long this lasts." Evelyn's lips curved, not into a smile exactly, but something close. "We will." And somewhere behind them, in the quiet of the playroom, a little boy picked up his fire truck again, but this time he made it move. The dining room was bright, sunlight spilling in through the tall windows, glinting off the silverware laid neatly beside pristine white plates. A vase of fresh tulips stood in the center of the table, their petals open wide, as if welcoming the noon hour. But the atmosphere between the three seats, set at one end, was anything but warm. Max sat stiffly, arms crossed over his chest, his eyes locked on a spot somewhere just beyond the edge of his plate. Mia mirrored his posture, lips pressed tightly together. Neither even glanced at the meal in front of them. Small portions of roasted chicken, steamed carrots, and warm rolls. Evelyn took her seat across from them without a single word about the food. She could feel the resistance radiating from them like heat from a summer sidewalk. This was the moment every nanny before her had failed. She knew it, and she suspected so did Damian, wherever he was in the house right now. Instead of diving into coaxing or bargaining, Evelyn rested her elbows lightly on the table and studied the twins. "Has anyone here ever been to a magical forest?" she asked, her voice casual, as if she were making idle conversation on a park bench. Mia's eyes flicked up for a fraction of a second, curiosity betrayed before she could stop it. Max stayed still, but his frown had shifted, not quite as ironclad as before. "Have never been," Evelyn continued, "but I've read about one. In this forest, the trees are so tall you can't see where they end, and the animals, they talk. Not in words exactly, but in a way you can understand if you listen carefully." She reached for the roll on her plate and broke it open, steam curling into the air. She took a small bite, then glanced toward the window, as though she could almost see it, the imaginary world she was weaving. "The fox there told me once," she went on, "that the food in the forest has secret powers, but only if you share it." Mia shifted in her seat, her gaze now firmly on Evelyn. "Secret powers?" she asked, suspicion and intrigue mingling in her tone. Evelyn nodded, as though she'd just been asked something of grave importance. Like, if you eat the carrots, you might find yourself able to see in the dark for a whole night. Or maybe, if you share your bread with a squirrel, you could run as fast as the wind for an hour." Max's arms loosened just slightly, one hand dropping to the edge of the table. "That's not real," he muttered, but his voice lacked the certainty of complete dismissal. "Of course not," Evelyn replied easily, popping another small piece of bread into her mouth. "It's just a story, but then again, stories sometimes have a way of hiding the truth where you least expect it." She took a forkful of chicken from her plate, holding it up as though examining it closely. "I wonder what this might do. The last time I tried it in the forest, a very polite rabbit asked me if I wanted to know where the rainbow ends." Mia leaned forward without realizing it, her lips parting. "And?" "I told him yes, of course, but he made me promise I'd eat at least 3 bites before he would tell me." Evelyn set the fork down and picked up her water glass, taking a sip as if she were in no rush at all to finish the story. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Finally, Mia reached for her fork, spearing the tiniest piece of carrot. She put it in her mouth without comment, chewing slowly. Evelyn didn't say a word. Eyes narrowed, watching his sister. "Do you feel anything?" he asked. Mia swallowed, pretending to consider. "Maybe," she said softly, her gaze flicking to Evelyn. Evelyn gave the barest smile. "Could be the start of night vision," she said, as if it were the most natural conclusion in the world. For the first time that day, Max's lips twitched towards something resembling a grin. He picked up his fork and poked at the chicken, then took a bite so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less attentive. Evelyn didn't pounce on the moment. She simply nodded to herself and continued eating her own lunch, occasionally offering a quiet remark about the forest animals that would love each food. She tore another piece of bread and held it above her plate. "This is for the little hedgehog who always falls asleep in the middle of my stories," she said, pretending to hand it off to an invisible creature beside her. Saying this, a small, surprised sound, as if she'd forgotten how to make it. "Careful," Evelyn warned with playful seriousness. "If you laugh too much while you eat bread, you might end up hiccuping for an hour. And the birds in the forest? They'll think you're singing to them." Max took another bite, his eyes darting to Mia, who was now eating without hesitation. The change was so gradual it almost felt inevitable. Bite by bite, the tension in their bodies loosened, replaced by an unspoken curiosity about what each food might. Damian had meant to pass by the dining room without stopping. He had a conference call waiting upstairs, numbers and contracts already running through his head. But when he reached the doorway, something made him pause. He stayed just out of sight, leaning lightly against the doorframe. The scene before him was so foreign, he almost wondered if he'd stepped into someone else's house. Max, who had been flatly refusing every meal for weeks, was chewing. Mia was chewing too, and smiling between bites. There was no raised voice, no bargaining, no bribes stacked like bargaining chips on the table. Instead, Evelyn sat across from them, calm and unhurried, as if she had nowhere else in the world she needed to be. He listened, trying to piece together the thread of the conversation. Something about a fox and Rainbow's End. His first instinct was to scoff. Surely they didn't believe these little tales. But the light in Mia's eyes, the way Max's fork hovered between bites as he considered her words, stopped him. "You're not eating enough to fly yet," Evelyn was saying to Mia, who popped another carrot into her mouth as if determined to prove her wrong. "Ah, that's better, but you might need 2 more bites before your wings are strong enough." Max glanced at his sister, then at Evelyn, then quietly speared another piece of chicken. He didn't say anything, but the action spoke louder than any words. Damian's mind flashed to the string of nannies before her, all walking out, some in tears after facing the brick wall his children had built. He had told himself it was the twins' grief, that time would soften the edges. But time had done nothing except widen the distance. And yet, here was this woman, barely half a day in, getting them to eat without once mentioning the word eat. He was almost reluctant to move, afraid he'd break whatever fragile magic had taken hold. But then, Evelyn's gaze flicked up, sharp, knowing. Her eyes found him in the shadows of the doorway, and for a brief second they simply looked at each other. There was no smugness in her expression, no silent, "see what I can do" challenge, just a quiet acknowledgement, as if she'd known all along he was there. Then, just as quickly, she turned back to the twins, asking Mia if she thought the rabbits would prefer bread or carrots. Damian stepped back, retreating toward the hall. He didn't know what to make of the knot in his chest. Relief? Maybe. Caution? Definitely. He'd seen too many people get their hopes up in this house, only for them to crumble when the twins retreated again. Back at the table, Evelyn tore her last piece of bread and set it on Mia's plate. "You'll have to finish this one for me," she said. "The hedgehog says thank you, but his tummy's full." Mia beamed, nibbling at the bread. "Tell him he's welcome." Max smirked. "It's not real," he said again, but this time there was no edge to it, just the faintest hint of play. Evelyn leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's what they all say, until they wake up one morning and find squirrel footprints on their pillow." Max's mouth curved upward, but he caught himself and quickly reached for his water. Mia laughed, the sound high and clear, and for the first time that day, the air in the dining room felt light. By the time the plates were cleared, half the food gone, which was a minor miracle in itself, the twins were arguing over what magical gift came from strawberries versus grapes. Evelyn listened, interjecting now and then, but never taking over their conversation. When the housekeeper came to collect the dishes, she paused, blinking in surprise at the state of the plates. "Looks like someone was hungry," she murmured. Mia grinned. "We have to keep our night vision strong," she said solemnly, as if the woman should already understand. Max added, "And just in case the fox comes back." The housekeeper gave Evelyn a questioning glance, but Evelyn only smiled and shrugged, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. After the twins were excused to wash their hands, Evelyn lingered at the table, stacking the used napkins neatly. She heard the faint tread of footsteps in the hall, Heavyson, the children's deliberate. Damian appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they just regarded each other. Beagly. "You got them to eat," he said finally, as if the words themselves felt strange in his mouth. Evelyn met his gaze evenly. "They got themselves to eat. I just gave them something else to think about while they did it." He considered that. Most people would have tried to make them eat. "That's why most people failed," she replied simply, her tone free of arrogance. Damian's eyes searched hers, perhaps for a flicker of self-congratulation, but he found none. Instead, there was that same grounded calm she'd carried since she walked into the playroom earlier. "I'll see you in the afternoon," he said after a pause, stepping back into the hall. Evelyn nodded, then turned to gather the last of the silverware, but in the quiet that followed, she allowed herself the smallest smile. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a beginning. Upstairs, the twins' voices echoed faintly, still debating which forest creature was the fastest. And for the first time in a long while, the mansion didn't feel quite so heavy. The morning sunlight poured into the sprawling kitchen, washing the marble counters in gold. Evelyn stood at the stove, flipping a pancake with deliberate care. The sizzling batter released the warm scent of vanilla and butter into the air. Max and Mia sat at the island, their legs dangling off the stools, eyes locked on the mixing bowl beside her. She didn't just make breakfast, she made a show of it. With each pour of batter, she tilted her head, listening to the imaginary chatter of her paintbrush, pretending it whispered secrets only she could hear. "You know," she said, her tone conspiratorial, "pancakes are best when they smile back at you." She pulled a small ramekin closer, dipping her spatula into chocolate batter before drawing a silly grin across the pale surface of a pancake. She added 2 blueberry eyes and a strawberry hat. Mia's lips twitched into a small, curious smile. "It's wearing a hat?" "Exactly," Evelyn replied, sliding the pancake onto her plate. "This is Sir Flapjack the Brave. He's here to give you super speed for the day. 1 bite and you'll run faster than Daddy's." Max snorted but didn't look away. Evelyn caught his gaze for a brief second, then glanced down as if she hadn't noticed. The trick wasn't in making them eat, it was in making them forget they were eating at all. When she set the plates in front of them, she didn't linger. She walked to the sink, humming softly, letting them think the choice was theirs. She'd learned quickly that if she hovered, they'd shut down. By the time she turned back, Mia was nibbling on Sir Flapjack's strawberry hat. Max picked up a piece with his fingers, chewing without fanfare. Evelyn smiled inwardly but kept her expression neutral. From the far side of the kitchen, Damian lingered. He'd come in for coffee but stopped short at the sight before him. For weeks, every meal had been a battlefield. Now, without coaxing or bribery, his children were eating and smiling. He sipped his coffee, pretending to check his phone while his eyes stayed fixed on the scene. Evelyn's approach baffled him. She didn't demand obedience, she drew them in with patience that seemed endless. After breakfast, Evelyn ushered the twins to the sunroom for fruit animals. The glass-walled space overlooked the garden, where morning dew still clung to the roses. She laid out bowls of melon, kiwi, grapes, and berries. With a small paring knife, she began shaping them into tiny creatures. A strawberry fox with melon ears. "What's that one?" Max asked, pointing to a grape with 2 blueberry eyes stuck on with cream cheese. Evelyn, hearing this, for a while, "is Gregory the garden owl. He can see everything from the highest tree. If you eat him, you'll be able to spot all the secret treasures in the yard today." Mia giggled, leaning over the table. "I want Gregory." Max reached for the kiwi turtle. "Mine," he declared, popping the fruit into his mouth. Evelyn made no comment on their choices, only kept crafting animals, letting the magic of the game take over. By the time the plates were empty, she'd told them stories about each creature and their adventures in the magical fruit kingdom. Damian passed by the sunroom twice, pretending to retrieve documents from the study, but really, he was watching. He noticed something he hadn't before. Yvonne laughed at his retreat, but twins, she was entirely in their world. No glances at her watch, no sighs, no subtle edge of impatience. That evening, dinner was sandwich towers. Evelyn stacked slices of bread, turkey, cheese, and vegetables into wobbly structures, letting the twins engineer their own. The rule was, to keep the tower from falling, you had to take a bite. Max's first bite brought down half his creation, sending a pickle rolling across the table. Instead of scolding, Evelyn burst out laughing. "Structural collapse. We'll have to rebuild." Mia tried to make hers taller, but halfway through she leaned over to take a bite, grinning with mayonnaise on her cheek. Damian sat at the far end of the table, his laptop open but forgotten. His children were eating and laughing, since that hadn't happened since before their mother. Later that week, Damian returned home later than usual. The house was quiet, save for the faint sound of a soft hum. He followed it upstairs to the twins' room, stopping at the doorway. Mia was curled in Evelyn's lap, her face damp from tears. Evelyn rocked her gently, stroking her hair, humming a tune that was low and steady. The lamplight painted a warm glow across the room. "A dream," Evelyn whispered, her voice soft but sure. "And I'm right here." Max lay in his bed, watching quietly, as if reassured by the sight. Damian didn't step inside. He stood in the shadowed hallway, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It wasn't just relief, it was warmth. He stayed there longer than necessary, listening until Mia's breathing evened out. When Evelyn finally glanced toward the door, he stepped back, pretending he'd just arrived. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Evelyn nodded. "Nightmare, she's fine now?" He hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Thank you." As he walked away, Damian realized he hadn't thanked anyone in that tone for years. By the third morning of Evelyn's new routines, the twins had begun to expect them, though neither would admit it out loud. When they came down for breakfast, Mia's eyes automatically swept the kitchen counter, searching for what game might be waiting. Max lingered just long enough to see what Evelyn had prepared, pretending to be uninterested. That day, it was pancake portraits again, but with a twist. Evelyn had arranged toppings in small glass bowls, letting them decorate their own. She didn't direct, didn't critique. She simply handed them each a plate with a perfectly round pancake and stepped back, arranging her own with exaggerated concentration. "Mine's going to be a pirate," Mia announced. "Mine's a monster," Max muttered, carefully placing banana slices as Evelyn peeked at their creations, nodding with mock seriousness. "I wouldn't want to meet either of them in a dark alley." Damian, on his way to the office, slowed at the sight. He was used to mornings filled with quiet defiance or cold silence. Now, there was chatter. Not loud, not forced, just natural. He almost interrupted, but thought better of it. That evening, Evelyn introduced fruit animals as dessert after dinner. This time, she let the twins invent their own. Mia constructed a berry caterpillar from blueberries and toothpicks. Max made something that looked vaguely like a dragon, using apple slices and grapes. "His name's Blaze," Max said without prompting, and Evelyn smiled, hearing the small note of pride in his voice. By the end of the week, the mealtime battles that had once defined the household were gone. Meals were still playful, but there was less resistance now and more moments of shared laughter. Evelyn noticed how the twins began to look for her after school, asking what they would do that day. Damian noticed too. It unsettled him, how quickly she had altered the rhythm of his home. But instead of resisting, he found himself lingering more often. He'd pause at the kitchen doorway, listening to her weave stories out of thin air. He'd watch the way Max's shoulders relaxed when she spoke, or how Mia's eyes lit up when Evelyn praised her ideas. One Friday night, Damian stayed later at the office than usual, the weight of a grueling week heavy on his mind. By the time he walked through the front door, the house was dim and quiet. The staff had gone for the night, but from upstairs came the faintest. He followed it to the twins' bedroom. The door was ajar, and inside, Evelyn sat on the edge of Mia's bed. The little girl clung to her arm, her face streaked with tears. Evelyn's other hand smoothed Mia's hair as she hummed, the sound low and steady. "It was a big, scary shadow," Mia whispered. "Shadows can't hurt you," Evelyn replied softly, "and they disappear as soon as you shine a light. Want me to tell you the story of the Shadow Eater?" Mia nodded, sniffling. Evelyn began, her voice gentle but rich with imagery. She spoke of a tiny, brave bird that swooped through the night, gobbling up shadows so children could sleep. By the time the tale ended, Mia's breathing had evened out, her small fingers still curled around Evelyn's sleeve. Across the room, Max lay in his own bed, eyes half closed but clearly listening. His usual guarded expression had softened. Damian stood in the hallway, unseen, caught by the warmth in the scene. Something shifted in him, a faint ache but also a strange sense of relief. He realized he hadn't heard that kind of soothing in his home for a very long time. When Evelyn finally glanced toward the door, Damian stepped back just enough to make it seem as if he'd just arrived. She rose carefully, pulling the blanket over Mia before moving toward him. "Nightmare?" he asked quietly. "Sure," she said, chic. "Fine now. Thank you." The words were simple, but something in his voice carried a depth he didn't intend to reveal. As she passed him in the hall, Damian caught a faint trace of lavender. Her shampoo, maybe. It lingered even after she'd gone downstairs. The following morning at breakfast, Evelyn found a fresh bag of her favorite coffee beans waiting on the counter, though no one admitted to putting it there. Over the next few days, Damian noticed himself adjusting his schedule. He'd take his coffee in the sunroom just to overhear Evelyn's morning games. He told himself it was curiosity, he wanted to understand her methods. But sometimes he stayed longer than necessary, not speaking, simply watching the easy way she moved through the room. One evening, he arrived home earlier than expected and found Evelyn and the twins in the garden. The late summer light painted everything in soft gold. The twins were crouched over a patch of soil, pretending to search for treasure seeds Evelyn had planted earlier. "Found one," Mia shouted, holding up a small, painted rock. "Only 2 more before the garden dragon wakes up," Evelyn called back, her laughter carrying in the breeze. Damian leaned against the doorway to the patio, unseen again, and for the second time in a week he felt that same strange pull in his chest. Later that night, long after the twins had gone to bed, he found himself replaying the scene in his mind, the soft hum in Mia's room, the giggle in the garden, the way Evelyn didn't just care for his children, but seemed to connect with them in a way he hadn't thought possible anymore. He didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid. It was close to midnight when Damian finally returned from his meeting downtown. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that settled when the twins were asleep and the staff had gone. He set his keys down on the console table and loosened his tie, his thoughts still tangled in negotiations and deadline. He passed the kitchen, heading toward his study, when a faint sound made him pause. It wasn't the clink of dishes or the hum of the refrigerator. It was a voice, soft, low, urgent. He followed the sound to the small sitting room near the back of the house. The door was half closed, and through the gap he could see Evelyn, seated on the edge of the couch, phone pressed to her ear. "I know, Mama," she was saying, her tone steady but laced with something fragile. "I sent part of the payment last week. I'll send the rest as soon as I can." She turned slightly, and Damian caught the faint sheen of worry in her eyes. "I know the hospital won't wait forever," she continued. I can't lose this job. I'm doing everything I can." She was silent for a moment, listening, then whispered, "Don't you dare say that. You've fought too hard to give up now." Damian felt something twist inside him. He'd never heard her voice like this, stripped of its playful lilt, stripped of the easy confidence she used with the twins. This was raw, real. "Figure it out," she said finally. "I promise. Just hold on." She ended the call, pressing the phone to her forehead for a moment before slipping it into her pocket. Damian stepped back, his mind unexpectedly heavy. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but he couldn't shake the words about hospital bills and the edge in her voice when she'd promised to send the rest. The next morning, Evelyn was in the kitchen making pancake snowmen with the twins when Damian entered. She looked up, smiling as if nothing in the world weighed on her. "Mornin', Mr. Cole," she said, flipping a pancake onto Mia's plate. He studied her for a moment before replying, "Morning." The twins were too busy decorating their snowmen with strawberry scarves to notice the undercurrent between the two adults. After breakfast, when the twins ran off to find their toys, Damian spoke quietly. "Can we talk?" Evelyn hesitated but nodded, following him into the sunroom. "Heard you on the phone last night," he said. "I didn't mean to overhear, but I caught enough to know something's wrong." Her shoulders tensed, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. Then she sighed. "It's my mother. She's been sick for a while. The bills keep piling up." "Is that why you took this job?" he asked. "Partly." Her eyes softened, but her voice held steady. "I also took it because I know what your kids are going through." Damian frowned. "How could you possibly—" "I grew up in a house where meals were battles," she interrupted gently. "My father worked long hours, my mother was too tired to fight with us, and I spent years thinking food was just another way to argue. It wasn't about hunger, it was about control, about feeling seen." She looked away briefly, her gaze drifting toward the garden. "I swore if I ever had the chance to help a kid through that, I'd do it. This job, it's not just about the paycheck, it's about making sure they never feel the way I did." Damian studied her, something unspoken moving between them. He'd hired her, expecting another nanny to cycle through, not someone who carried her own battle scars. "We see," he said quietly. And he did, more than he'd expected. The conversation ended when Max bounded into the room, clutching a Lego creation. Evelyn turned to admire it without missing a beat, her earlier vulnerability tucked neatly away again. But Damian couldn't forget it. That evening, he found himself lingering near the playroom long after he'd intended to retreat to his study. Evelyn was seated cross-legged on the rug, a book open in her lap, the twins pressed against her sides. She read in a low, rhythmic voice, occasionally pausing to let Mia or Max finish a sentence. As the story wound down, Evelyn's voice softened, her eyes growing heavier. By the time she closed the book, her head had tipped slightly, her breathing even. She'd fallen asleep right there, the twins nestled against her. Damian stepped inside quietly, careful not to wake any of them. He reached for the blanket folded on the back of the couch and draped it over her shoulders. For a moment, he stood there, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her breathing, the truth in the way the twins leaned against her, even in sleep. Then, without quite knowing why, he turned off the light and left the room, the image of them imprinted in his mind long after he'd gone upstairs. The next morning, Damian rose earlier than usual. He told himself it was because of an early call with the London office, but as he descended the stairs, he found himself slowing near the playroom door again. Evelyn was there already, dressed simply, hair loosely tied back, kneeling beside the twins as they worked on a puzzle. "Careful, Max, that's a corner piece," she murmured with a small smile. "Corners are like anchors, they hold everything together." Max grinned, shifting the piece into place. "Like you hold us together?" Evelyn laughed softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Something like that?" Damian's chest tightened unexpectedly. He stepped away before she noticed him, but her words lingered. Anchors. Stability. Things his children had been missing for too long. Later that day, between meetings, he caught himself replaying the sound of her voice from the night before. How it had softened when she spoke to her mother, the fierce loyalty tucked beneath her calm tone. He couldn't remember the last time someone had put another person's well-being above their own without expecting something in return. That evening, he returned home earlier than planned. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted apples. In the dining room, Evelyn had set the table in a way that felt more like a family gathering than a formal meal. The twins were already seated, chatting about the dessert surprise Evelyn had promised if they finished their dinner. Damian took his seat, watching the scene with quiet curiosity. There was a rhythm to the way she guided them, offering choices without pressure, weaving little stories about where the vegetables came from, how the chicken had been marinated, like a secret recipe in an old castle. The twins giggled, chewing without even realizing they'd polished off their plates. When dessert came, warm apple slices with a drizzle of honey, Damian noticed Mia reaching over to share hers with Evelyn. The nanny accepted it with mock ceremony, as though it were the greatest honor in the world. He didn't join the conversation much, but he didn't need to. It was enough to watch them, the edges of his guarded world slowly softening. 2 nights later, after putting the twins to bed, Damian walked past the playroom again. The lights were low, and Evelyn was on the floor with a box of paints, helping the twins create a family portrait. He stopped in the hallway, unseen. The paper showed 2 small figures with brown hair, a taller man with dark hair, and beside him, a woman with a bright yellow dress and a wide smile. "Is that you?" Evelyn asked softly, pointing at the woman. Mia nodded. "You're part of our family now." Evelyn's voice caught, just for a second. "That's very sweet, Mia." Damian didn't move. He wasn't sure if stepping in would break whatever fragile magic she'd spun. Later that week, the house fell into a rare hush after dinner. The twins were tucked in early, and most of the staff had retired for the night. Damian passed through the kitchen, intending to grab a glass of water, when he spotted Evelyn at the counter, sorting through a small stack of bills. She didn't notice him at first. Her brow was furrowed, lips pressed together as she shifted one envelope to the bottom of the pile, almost like it pained her to look at it. "You shouldn't be doing that here," Damian said quietly. Evelyn jumped, then exhaled slowly. "Sorry, I didn't think anyone was around." He stepped closer. "Those are the medical bills, aren't they?" Her eyes flicked up to his. "I told you before, I'm managing it." "We're mind. I'm not doubting that," he replied, his voice even. "But managing doesn't mean you have to carry it alone." Her chin lifted slightly. "I've carried bigger burdens alone before." He studied her for a long moment, recognizing the pride in her stance, the same stubborn streak he saw in himself. "You don't have to prove anything here, Evelyn. Not to me, not to them." Her expression softened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she gathered the bills and slipped them into her bag. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Cole. Really. But I'm here to take care of Mia and Max. That's the job I signed up for." He almost told her that she was doing more than that she was changing the air in this house, loosening the knots he hadn't realized were choking the place. But the words caught in his throat. That night, he found himself in the hallway again, standing outside the twins' room. He'd come to check on them, but paused when he saw Evelyn seated on the edge of Mia's bed. The little girl was whimpering in her sleep, tiny hands clutching the blanket. Evelyn brushed her hair back and began humming softly, a low, soothing melody that wrapped around the room like a warm blanket of its own. Slowly, Mia's breathing evened out, her small body relaxing. Evelyn lingered a moment, watching over her, before rising quietly. Damian stepped back into the shadows before she could see him. He stayed there for a while after she left, staring at the half-opened door. Something inside him felt unsettled, though not in a way he wanted to push away. When he finally went to bed, the sound of that quiet humming followed him into sleep. The dining room gleamed in the late afternoon light, polished silver catching the glow from the tall windows. Damian had agreed to host a business lunch with two associates, Victor Hale, an old family contact known for his blunt opinions, and Marissa Kent, a polished investor with a cool, assessing gaze. He'd planned it as a formal meal, with the twins present only for the first course so they could practice social dining skills. Evelyn had prepared the children's plates herself, setting them with care. Mac's sandwich had been cut into the shape of a little train, complete with cucumber wheels. Mia's plate had fruit arranged like a sun, with thin carrot sticks for rays. Between them sat a small bowl of hummus, decorated with a smiley face. The twins giggled the moment they sat down, reaching for their plates. Damian noted the spark of delight in their eyes, the ease with which they began eating. For weeks, that had been nearly impossible. Victor's gaze swept over the plates, his brows lifting. "Well," he said, chuckling under his breath, "I see we're training future food critics in the art of playground cuisine." Damian glanced at him, his jaw tightening slightly. "They've been eating better lately," he said evenly. "This works for them." Victor waved a hand dismissively. "Children should learn discipline early, Damian. All these games and shapes, it's coddling. They need to eat what's put in front of them, without expecting a show." Mia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Max lowered his sandwich back to the plate, eyes flicking between the adults. Evelyn's posture remained calm, but Damian could sense the shift in her focus. She set down her own napkin before speaking. "With respect, Mr. Hale, they do eat what's put in front of them, now, but only because they know it's safe and a little fun." Victor snorted. "Safe? It's lunch, not a battlefield." Her eyes met his squarely. "For some children, it feels like one. For them, meals used to be stressful. I'm not here to impress guests. My job is to help them feel secure enough to eat, and enjoy doing it." The room stilled. Marissa's gaze shifted between them, clearly intrigued by Evelyn's composed defiance. Damian kept his expression neutral, but something inside him twisted. Part of him wanted to step in, to tell Victor he had no right to question the woman who had made more progress with the twins in weeks than multiple specialists had in months. Another part of him knew Victor was the kind of man who would see that as a weakness. Victor leaned back in his chair, clearly amused by her unwillingness to yield. "And how long do you plan to keep pretend at mealtimes? Until they're in high school?" Lifted for them to feel confident and cared for. "Then yes," Evelyn said without hesitation. Her tone was firm, but not hostile, the kind that came from knowing exactly what she stood for. Damian noticed the faintest pink flush on Mia's cheeks. the way Max had inched closer to his sister under the table. They were listening to every word. Victor smirked, shaking his head. "You'll spoil them, mark my words." "Or," Evelyn said softly, "I'll teach them that mealtimes can be a place of connection instead of anxiety. That's a lesson worth more than any rule about finishing vegetables before dessert." The silence stretched again, heavy and charged. Damian's fingers curled against his knee under the table. He couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to Victor like that, and certainly not in his house. Marissa broke the tension with a measured sip of water. "I suppose there's merit in creating positive associations early," she said, her voice light but carrying an undertone of thoughtfulness. Victor rolled his eyes, clearly deciding to let it drop, but not before muttering something under his breath about soft approaches. Damian caught Evelyn's glance across the table, steady, unshaken, and felt a flicker of something that had nothing to do with the business lunch and everything to do with her refusal to shrink in the face of criticism. The rest of the meal passed in uneasy truce. The twins, sensing the undercurrents but reassured by Evelyn's steady presence, resumed eating, though Max still shot wary glances toward Victor now and then. Evelyn caught each look and responded with a small, reassuring smile, her voice light as she asked if he wanted more cucumber wheels for his train. Slowly, he relaxed. Damian kept the conversation with his guests steered toward business, though part of his mind stayed anchored to the exchange that had just happened. It wasn't lost on him how unusual it was for anyone to challenge Victor and remain so calm, especially in front of an audience. When dessert came, a simple berry parfait for the twins and coffee for the adults, Mia leaned close to Evelyn and whispered something. Evelyn chuckled, then helped the little girl layer her spoon with berries and yogurt, making a show of pretending the spoon was a rocket on a countdown. Mia giggled and ate with enthusiasm. Victor noticed and smirked again. "Still playing," he murmured. Evelyn didn't look his way. "Yes," she said simply, "because it works." Damian caught the faint arc of Marissa's brow at Evelyn's quiet confidence. He found himself wondering how she managed to do that, hold her ground without raising her voice, turn criticism into something that only made her resolve stronger. When the plates were cleared, Evelyn began guiding the twins from the table, reminding them to thank the guests. They did so, hesitant but polite, before heading toward the playroom. Victor leaned forward. "Damian, if you want my opinion—" "I don't weaken you," Damian said evenly, his tone polite but leaving no room for debate. Victor's eyes widened slightly, but Damian didn't elaborate. He excused himself to check on the twins. In the playroom, he found Evelyn kneeling on the rug, helping Max construct a block tower while Mia drew on a large sheet of paper. Both children looked utterly content. Evelyn glanced up as he stepped inside, the faintest question in her eyes, as though she wondered if he'd come to reprimand her. Instead, he said, "Thank you for earlier." Her brow furrowed slightly. "For what?" "Standing up for them." He paused. "And for yourself." A small smile touched her lips, though her gaze returned quickly to the tower. "It's just my job." Damian leaned against the doorway, studying her. Not everyone would see it that way. Her hands remained steady as she placed another block for Max. "Not everyone understands what's at stake when a child stops trusting me all times. It's about feeling safe enough to take what's offered." He didn't answer right away, but the truth in her words resonated deeper than he wanted to admit. His own childhood meals had been rigid, ruled by silence and expectations. He'd thought structure was the only way to instill strength. Now, watching Max laugh as the tower wobbled and Mia hummed as she drew, he wondered if he'd been wrong. The moment was interrupted by Max's sudden exclamation, "She's the best!" Both Damian and Evelyn looked at him. Max grinned shyly, his eyes bright. "You are," he told Evelyn, before returning to his. Damian saw the flicker of surprise on Evelyn's face before she ducked her head, clearly moved. He didn't miss the way her voice softened as she thanked Max. Something shifted in the air then, unspoken but undeniable. It wasn't just the twins who were starting to trust her. He was too. The house had been silent for over an hour, the faint creaks of settling wood blending with the distant hum of the night outside. Damian lingered in his study, pen hovering over a contract he wasn't truly reading. The memory of Mac's bright grin and Mia's unguarded giggle from earlier kept replaying in his mind like a song he couldn't shake. Finally, he closed the file, set down the pen, and crossed the hall toward the library. The warm glow from the sconces on the walls spilled across the shelves, making the room feel less like a mausoleum of untouched books and more like a refuge. Evelyn was there, arranging small plates on the low table near the leather sofa. She looked up, slightly startled to see him, but then her expression softened. "I thought you might still be working," she said quietly. "I was," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I wanted to talk to you. Would you join me for tea?" She hesitated, her hand brushing against the delicate china cups as though weighing the invitation. Then she nodded, taking a seat at the opposite end of the sofa. The kettle on the tray let out a soft hiss as she poured, and the scent of chamomile curled into the air between them. Damian accepted the cup she handed him, his gaze steady but not intense. "I realized something tonight," he began, his voice low enough that it felt like the library itself might be listening. "I haven't heard that much laughter in this house since—" He paused, his jaw tightening before the words came. "Since—" Evelyn's hand stilled on her cup, her eyes lifting to meet his. The shadows of the lamplight played across her face, softening the lines of quiet strength she so often carried. "I didn't know that," she said gently. "I mean, I could tell they've been through a lot, but I didn't realize how long it's been since—" She stopped herself, unsure if finishing the thought would tread on something too personal. Damian took a breath, the memory flickering like an old photograph in his mind. It's been years of silence during meals, years of trying to do what's best for them, but feeling like nothing I did was enough. Could gaze drop to her tea. "I was terrified I'd fail," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "The first day here, I thought they'd hate me forever. I thought every smile I tried to earn would just be another reminder of how much they'd lost." She hesitated, then looked back at him, her eyes steady despite the vulnerability in her tone. "But now, they feel like family to me." The words settled between them like something too fragile to move. Damian felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest, a shift he couldn't quite name. Her sincerity wasn't the polished, calculated kind he so often encountered. It was raw, unpolished truth. He reached for his cup at the same time she set hers down, and their hands brushed in the middle of the table. The contact was brief, a warm pulse of connection that neither of them commented on, but both felt. Evelyn's breath caught, and Damian noticed. Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it was charged with everything neither of them had said yet. He was about to speak again when a faint sound reached them from upstairs. Evelyn's head turned sharply. "That's Mia." They both rose without another word, moving in perfect unison through the hall and up the staircase. Damian marveled at how instinctively they matched each other's pace, each step purposeful, their focus entirely on the child's voice. They found Mia sitting upright in bed, her cheeks flushed, her small hands clutching the blanket. Tears clung to her lashes, and her breathing was fast and uneven. Evelyn was at her side in a heartbeat, kneeling so her face was level with the little girl's. "Hey, sweetheart," she murmured, smoothing Mia's hair back. "Bad dream?" Mia nodded, her lips trembling. Damian came closer, his presence quiet but grounding. He took a seat on the edge of the bed, letting Evelyn keep her place at Mia's side. "It's okay," Evelyn continued, her voice as soft as the lamplight spilling across the room. "You're safe. We're both here." She glanced briefly at Damian, as if making sure he understood that she was including him in that promise. He did, and it hit him with surprising force. He wasn't just the distant figure who paid for everything and expected results. In this moment, he was part of the comfort, part of the security she was giving them. Evelyn began to hum, a tune Damian didn't recognize but instantly felt the calm of him. Mia's breathing began to slow, her grip on the blanket loosening. Damian, without thinking, reached out and lightly rested his hand over her small one. She looked at him, then at Evelyn, and a faint smile touched her mouth. "I'll stay until you fall asleep," Evelyn promised. "We both will," Damian added. The child's eyes grew heavy, her lashes fluttering shut as Evelyn's quiet humming filled the room. Damian sat still, letting the minutes pass, aware of every heartbeat in the silence. When Mia finally drifted into sleep, Evelyn eased her hand away and stood slowly. Damian followed, the two of them stepping back into the hallway and pulling the door almost closed behind them. They didn't speak right away. The dim light of the hallway seemed to hold them in a suspended moment, neither willing to break it. Finally, Damian spoke. "Of a decision," he said, his voice steady. Evelyn tilted her head, curiosity flickering across her features. "About what?" "About you," he replied. "Your place here. I don't care what anyone says. This isn't temporary anymore. You belong here as much as they do." Her eyes widened slightly, as if she'd expected resistance, not certainty. "Damian, I've seen what you've done for them in such a short time," he continued, cutting off whatever protests she might have had. "It's not just that they're eating again. They're laughing. They're trusting. That's because of you." She looked down briefly, her expression caught between gratitude and something else, something "Then don't," he said softly. "Just keep doing what you're doing." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, and Damian felt the unshakable certainty settle into him like the final piece of a puzzle. No matter the cost, no matter the opinion of business associates or the whispers of society, Evelyn was staying. And for the first time in years, that decision felt as natural as breathing. 6 months later, the city had finally begun to warm after a stubborn winter. The park stretched wide and green under a pale blue sky, the air carrying the faint scent of early spring flowers and freshly cut grass. Damian set the picnic basket down on a soft, checkered blanket spread beneath a wide oak tree whose branches swayed lazily in the breeze. Max and Mia darted across the grass in quick bursts of energy, their laughter echoing like wind chimes. Evelyn knelt beside the basket, unpacking small containers of food with an ease that came from countless shared meals. Her hair caught the sunlight as she pulled out plates, each movement unhurried, confident, natural. From where he stood, Damian felt a quiet satisfaction settle deep in his chest. This was no boardroom victory, no headline-making acquisition. It was better. Mia was the first to return, holding out a flower with a bright grin. "For you," she said, thrusting it into Evelyn's hand. Evelyn's smile was warm enough to melt the last memory of frost from the day. "Thank you, sweetheart." She tucked the flower behind her ear before pulling a container of sliced strawberries toward her. "Fruit first," Max announced, plopping down on the blanket beside her. He reached for a slice, then hesitated, picking up another piece and holding it toward her lips. "You have to eat too," he said seriously. Evelyn accepted the bite with a laugh, the simple act radiating more tenderness than anything money could buy. Damian lowered himself onto the blanket across from them, watching the easy way they moved around her, like planets around a steady sun. On the nearby park bench, a discarded newspaper caught his eye. The headline was bold, almost gleeful in its certainty. "From Nanny to Family. Damian Hale's new chapter." The photograph beneath showed a candid shot of the four of them leaving a community center last month. Max clutching Evelyn's hand, Mia balanced on Damian's hip. He had ignored the reporter's questions then, just as he'd ignored every follow-up request for comment. It wasn't their business, but the truth of the headline, at least, was undeniable. Evelyn followed his gaze and gave a small, almost amused shake of her head. "You saw it too." "I did," he said. "They got one thing right." Her brow lifted. "Which part?" "It's a new chapter," he replied simply. Mia climbed into Evelyn's lap, curling against her with the trust of someone who no longer questioned safety. Damian reached for the thermos, pouring tea into a pair of cups. "I never thanked you properly," he said after a moment. Evelyn blinked. "For what?" "Being exactly who they needed," he answered, "and for being exactly who I didn't know I needed too." She looked down briefly, her fingers brushing Mia's hair. "You've done as much for me as I've done for them," she said quietly. "You gave me a place to belong." The breeze rustled the branches overhead, scattering tiny blossoms onto the blanket. Damian leaned back on one hand, letting the moment breathe. He thought of the foundation launch 2 weeks ago, the way Evelyn's eyes had widened when he unveiled the plaque bearing her name. The Evelyn Hart Children's Nutrition Initiative had been his way of making permanent what she'd inspired, a program to ensure that children in underserved communities had access to healthy meals, nutrition education, and safe places to eat without judgment. "You didn't have to do that," she had told him that night, still stunned. "I did," he'd answered, "because what you've done here shouldn't stop at these walls." Now, as she fed Mia another slice of fruit, the sunlight catching the faint curve of her smile, he knew he'd made the right choice. Lunch stretched into the slow rhythm of an unhurried afternoon. Max lay on his stomach, coloring in a small sketchbook Evelyn had tucked into the basket, while Mia chased a ladybug across the edge of the blanket. The city's distant hum was softened here, replaced by the occasional bark of a dog or the laughter of another family somewhere on the grass. Damian passed Evelyn a plate of sandwiches, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact was casual, but it carried the weight of months of unspoken understanding. She didn't look away immediately this time. "Bear changed," she said suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. "I have?" She smiled more, she replied, taking a small bite of her sandwich. "And you? You don't seem like you're always somewhere else in your head." He considered that. "Maybe because I'm exactly where I want to be." The words landed between them with quiet finality, and Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile before she looked away, pretending to focus on slicing more fruit. Mia returned, plopping down beside Damian and holding up her tiny hand. "It flew away," she announced of the ladybug. "Means it like you," he said, pulling her into his lap. She giggled, leaning her head back against his shoulder. Evelyn watched them for a moment, her expression open and unreadable all at once. The shadows from the oak tree shifted as the afternoon wore on, dappling the blanket in light. Eventually, Max abandoned his coloring to sprawl across Evelyn's lap, eyes drifting shut in the warm comfort of the day. Mia curled closer to Damian, her breathing slowing to match the lazy rhythm of the breeze. Damian met Evelyn's gaze over the tops of the children's heads. There was no need for words now. Everything essential had already been said in moments like these, through trust given, battles fought, together, and the quiet, consistent choice to stay. The tabloid headline might have been meant for gossip, but here, under the canopy of green, it felt like a private truth. They were a family now, by choice as much as by circumstance. Evelyn reached out, brushing a stray leaf from his shoulder. He caught her hand gently, holding it for just a second longer than necessary before letting go. The sun dipped lower, turning the light golden. Damian lay back on the blanket, one arm tucked behind his head. Evelyn shifted to stretch out beside him, careful not to wake Max. Mia nestled between them, her small hand resting in Evelyn's. For a while, they simply lay there, all four of them, the kind of peaceful silence that didn't need to be filled. The breeze moved through the branches above, carrying their laughter from earlier like an echo that belonged to the place now. No refusals, no battles, just a table, or in this case a blanket, for four. And for the first time in far too long, Damian let himself believe that this was not a fragile moment to be guarded, but the life they had built and would keep building.